Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Oscar Piastri doesn't believe the championship is over quite yet, still motivated according to his manager Mark Webber to bring the comeback in the final 3 rounds of the season, but should Lando, Norris or even Max Verstappen be especially concerned after what we have seen over the last couple of months, especially the lack of podiums since Monza. Lots of other updates on the day as well. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. A week today will be the Las Vegas Grand Prix, because I believe it's a Saturday night race this time around rather than on a Sunday for various reasons, and then it's a triple header. Las Vegas, Qatar with a sprint, then Abu Dhabi to close out the season. Before we get there, a quick update on Checo Perez's lap times, because we talked about it yesterday that Perez was doing some runs. We saw that he did a 118 apparently his fastest lap was actually a 117.2 according to some other sources, which was faster than the fastest lap of the race last year, which was Max with a 117, or this year with a 117.9. Now of course this isn't relevant, right, because we don't know what he was doing with that 117.2. The fastest qualifying time was a 114 or something. This, of course, was the blacked out liveried SF23 that Cadillac were testing. So it's not clear to say, oh, well, Perez was in that car and he was all of a sudden quicker than Max, like he's back. The times, as they say themselves, don't really mean much. But clearly that 117 was probably more of a push lap with maybe some more battery deployment. Was the DRS open? We don't really know. But we're also comparing a couple of year-old Ferrari with the latest Red Bull. So that's just a brief update there to correct from yesterday. Apparently Xavi Marcos, who used to be Leclerc's race engineer, he was actually working with Checo here for this test, effectively running the test with them. So Cadillac definitely are making some acquisitions, and this is relevant for other teams as well, because some teams this year have struggled more with the pit stops than we might have expected. We don't often talk about Alpine's pit stops much because they're not usually relevant, to be honest, to the races, and we very rarely see them because Alpine are running 16th and 17th. But Alpine have trouble with their pit stops lately, and what they say is they've lost a load of team members to Cadillac. So Cadillac came along building their new team from the ground up, because Audi is a bit different because they're taking over Sauber, right? But for Cadillac, this is a fully 11th team from the ground up operation, which has consequences. They need to hire lots of people. I believe their headcount is now 500, something in that ballpark. They need some good pit stop crew guys, and they've gone to a load of the teams and they've stolen them, right? They've gone to Alpine, they've gone to others. That's what Alpine say. They're like, we've lost a load of personnel because there's this new team coming along. So that will be affecting other teams as well. Congratulations, Mohammed Ben Sulayem as well. It seems now inevitable he will be retaining his crown. And, I actually do mean crown in some respects, as the president of the FIA. Not yet official, but they have announced today that he will be the only candidate. So if you guys haven't heard the story on this, effectively, in order to have another candidacy application from Tim Mayer, Laura Villas, among others that tried, you need to have a cabinet. And unfortunately, or maybe intentionally, one of those individuals you have to propose from the cabinet has to be certain regions. One of those regions, South America, only has one available option, and she's Bernie Ecclestone's wife, and she's committed her support to Ben Sulayem. So effectively, there was no hope of anyone else even submitting an application that ticked all the boxes, so Ben Sulayem remains president by default. Now, understandably, Laura Villas, Tim Mayer aren't very happy about this. They have talked to a judge and jury, and that the trial has actually begun on that front, and there's going to be a ruling on the 3rd of December. So it's not over yet, but if things don't change, then we'll see, because on the 3rd of December, if the judge says unlucky, tough, basically, then Ben Sulayem will stay there for sure. But the elections are on the 12th, so it's like, it's not much time to run a campaign when you're only going to find out on the 3rd if you're going to even possibly be allowed. And even if the judge says, you know what, yeah, she probably should, and Tim Mayer should be able to have a candidacy, what do? Do you force them to change the rules? There's only a week until the elections. So Ben Sulayem will say, oh, there's no time. Unlucky guys. There we go. Congratulations, I'm back at it again. 2 other big updates. We talked over the last few days that McLaren were questioning whether Verstappen's engine that he took in Brazil should be considered under the cost cap. They think that it should be, but maybe if Red Bull claimed, oh, it's for reliability, then they wouldn't be able, they'd get away with it effectively. Now, what's interesting is, remember when Max got in the car and the first thing he said, having the new engine, was, wow, this engine vibrates a load less than the other one. So immediately it's like, oh, I got a second, is Max kind of playing a smart game here to be like, oh, there was definitely a reliability concern. That's why we gave them the new engine. But Red Bull actually decided they weren't going to fight that, which does surprise me a little bit. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I almost feel like if Jonathan Wheatley was still there and Christian Horner was still there, they would have tried to say, oh, this was definitely for reliability reasons. Did you hear what Max said on the radio? He said the other one was vibrating. Like we had a big issue that we needed to resolve, which is why we took the new engine. But no, Red Bull apparently just told them like, yeah, we took it for performance reasons, and as a result, it will be included. So they probably knew that it was fruitless trying to fight it. But I still feel like the Red Bull of old would have found a way to find a loophole there. But I thought that was interesting. There was also discussions in that commission meeting on the mandatory two-stop race. We saw it mandated in Monaco. There's talk of them mandating it elsewhere. The concern from James Vowles, I think, was that everyone will just do the same strategy if you're forced to do a two-stop. The difference in the one-stop and the two-stop races sometimes make for very good races, so mandating a two-stop might not be the best idea, but it depends how they mandate the two-stop. If the two-stop is mandated by you have to use all three compounds in a race that isn't wet, then I think you do have different strategies because teams will have a very different idea what compound they want to start on, which we don't currently see all that much of an F1. Couple of things on Ferrari. It was 5 years ago. Hamilton turned up in Turkey and won his 7th Drivers' World Championship. A few years later on Ferrari, it's not exactly been a great season. Ollie Behrman, he may well drive for Ferrari at some point in the future. I think at this point, I'd be relatively surprised if he doesn't at some point. Who that would be replacing is a good question. How many years we might be talking about here, another good question. Hamilton may well be there another couple of years and call it a day. Leclerc may decide he needs to seek greener pastures. And, well, some Ferrari fans are saying, oh, Behrman, you know, don't go to Ferrari. It's the end, right? Like, it's not going to end well, as it hasn't for many drivers over the last couple of decades. But Behrman's been very clear in his assessment that, you don't turn down Ferrari if the opportunity is there, kind of regardless of the situation. And wow, they have been piling on the PR propaganda, haven't they? I mean, you look at this the last few days. We'll see you soon, Tifosi. The work continues in Maranello. Here's Hamilton, right? We saw him with his notebook yesterday. So, talking to the engineers, put it in the work. They've got suiting up. They kill it on the social media game. And here they are today, race trim with a couple of shots. Of course, they're turning up to Las Vegas in a couple of days' time. Okay, some nice pictures, always good to see. But if you look at the replies, you'll see a very similar story. They've been trying their best to hold off the horde, but it's not working very well. Elkan out, Elkan out. Race trim, top management still running in eco mode. Elko out, Elkan out. We've even got pictures of it here. We've got some other ones as well. All sorts of stuff, like some pretty funny moments as well. So there we have it. Günther Steiner, among others, have been very critical of Elkan's comments. Those comments actually continue to come out today. Steiner says he has the right to criticise because he's the boss, but I don't think he should do it in public. Charles, this guy puts his whole heart and soul into what he does. What more do you want from him? And then who chose the drivers, right? Which is also a fair point. Sometimes you got to look in the mirror. I'm sure he agreed to hire Lewis, at least that's my understanding. I criticised the guy, but I'm the one who picked him. Maybe I made a mistake. So if he thinks he made the wrong decision, then he should admit it, which again, I don't think he necessarily does, or I'm not exactly sure that's 100% what Elkan was implying, but it was just a bad time to say what he said, that the drivers should shut up and basically talk less and drive the car more. Because as I said, when we first talked about this, Elkan was the one, as far as we understand, really pushing hard to sign Hamilton. So, I think he makes a fair assessment there. Even Giancarlo Minardi, of course, founder of the Minardi Formula One team, says that's not how you run a team. The president of a team should be a good head of the family. Criticism is done internally, never externally. Leclerc's qualifying time was set by the driver, not the car. We need management like that ahead of a family, not that of a courtroom. So, strong words, but I think expected words. And even, I found it somewhat surprising, we had Adrian Newey yesterday. He was saying you've got to listen to your drivers because what they say about the car is the most important thing you can possibly understand. And then Laura McKeese comes out and says, Max is the best sensor we have when it comes to what's going on with the car. So just thought it was kind of funny that on 2 subsequent days, you've got 2 different teams talking about how important it is to listen to the driver's feedback. And yes, it's in a slightly different regards, but fundamentally it's quite similar. Ferrari seem to have a rather different approach. Even Jacques Villeneuve decided to give his thoughts, as he always likes to do. Actually, we shouldn't be too surprised. Just think what happened with Prost, with Mansell, with Alonso, with Vettel. There seems to be a pattern at Ferrari. Ferrari comes first and will always protect Ferrari. Is that, though, to the positive ends? We've even got fan pages like CL16 fan page coming out with Ferrari under John Elkann, 8 seasons, 160 races, 15 wins, 0 championships, 3 victoryless seasons. That might become 4, and then a list of the quality drivers. I mean, they've even got Ollie Bearman in there, right? Obviously, he stepped in for Sainz last season, but, the point pretty much still stands in that time frame. 100,000 views, 7,000 likes. There's a lot of frustration, right, among the Ferrari fans, certainly among the Leclerc and Hamilton fans specifically, with the way things are currently going. But also some frustration, and Steiner also gives some thoughts on the circumstances at McLaren. Is there still a chance for Oscar Piastri in this championship? Lando has now pulled 24 points ahead. That's more than I think any of us could possibly have expected after the last couple of Grand Prix. Turning up to Mexico, things were looking pretty good because Austin had definitely gone Lando's way. The drama in the sprints cost both of them scoring points, and Max now looked like he was right back in the equation. But for Lando to turn up to Mexico and be purple all weekends, and then effectively do the same thing in Brazil, with Oscar struggling on both occasions. Look, Oscar's struggles at this point in the season aren't a new thing. He hasn't done very well around these tracks we've just raced at historically. The next couple, I think, should be better, but it could be a little bit too little too late. Now, 24 points is a lot, to be honest, with 3 rounds to go. But it isn't impossible, especially if Lando was to get into an incident. Who knows what can happen? So it's still very much on mathematically. But right now, Lando, I wouldn't say would be favoured to wrap it up by Qatar. He's certainly championship favourite. And I think there's a good chance that Lando wraps it up by Qatar, right? Because if he's 26 points ahead going into Abu Dhabi, he's currently 24 points ahead, then he'll be the champion. So he's just got to make sure he keeps scoring enough points that Max isn't a problem, and then outscore Piastri by 1 point over the next 2 weekends, times 2, that would be enough to secure the championship without even worrying about performing in Abu Dhabi. So it's going to be tough for Oscar. The current standings look like this: 390, 366, 341. I mean, for Max to win from there, yes, I think in Brazil he kept his dreams alive in some sense. It looked like after Saturday it was over. He kept it alive with the drive on Sunday. But it's still an awful lot to think, right? There is the sprint. That does give another 8 points potentially if there was to be some sort of drama. And I don't expect McLaren to be as weak around Vegas this year as they have been for the last couple, but you also don't know, right? Max obviously needs to win every weekend anyway. Certainly winning in Vegas will be possible, I would say, given the strengths and weaknesses that McLaren that we've seen there over the last couple of years. But Lando's pulled out a big advantage, and part of that, I think a significant part of it, is Lando stepping up for sure, but also we know that Oscar has faltered pretty massively. What happened in Baku, I mean, ever since then, it's really been a bit of a nightmare. Not podiumed, as we know, since that controversial Papaya Rules Monaco Grand Prix. Piastri also confirms that the car has kind of moved in a way with the upgrades and the direction they've taken with the setup that he's not especially fond of. And look, is that internal team bias? But you also might argue, because Lando said the same thing the other way at the start of the season. I think there's, sometimes you get a bit of double standards here, because at the start of the season when Lando, who, let's be honest, right, I'm not like a massive Lando fan or anything. You know that I've been critical of him this season and previous seasons. But Lando has, frankly, dominated his teammates for the last few years at that McLaren team. The start of this season, that was not the case. And Lando was talking to the media and saying, look, I'm not super happy with the performance of the car in terms of its characteristics. The performance is great, but its characteristics don't suit me so well. And we've talked in depth about what the feel level characteristics under brake and all those things that relates to, the front suspension changes and some of these other updates, anti-dive, that have changed the way that Lando felt about the car. Now, over time, he's found a way, maybe the team have found a way to make him more comfortable and get a better feel and response from the front end, especially of the car. That seems to be what it is anyway. So at the start of the season, Lando is on the same level as Oscar, pretty much, but he's talking publicly that he's not very happy. And, we've known that Lando has been faster than his teammates, certainly Oscar the last couple of years. Oscar was always going to keep getting better, but I think the gap and the step that Oscar took this off-season coming into this season was unexpected, right? And Lando was criticised. I'm sure I also did some of the criticism, talking about this car publicly, that it didn't really suit him, but, it was obviously still the fastest car, right? So there was that debate. And now, a few months later, Oscar is coming out and saying, look, the car now isn't suiting me so well, and his performance has fallen off compared to Lando, right? So I think there's some understandable nuance here, right? It's like if Oscar is struggling with the car now, and that's one of the reasons why his performance has dropped off compared to Lando, who prefers it more, then you could also argue that at the start of the season, it wasn't necessarily Oscar making a huge step, it was that Lando was struggling with the car at that moment. Now, the fact that they've moved in the direction they have, that it seems that Lando's happier with than Oscar, that's where some of the theories will start to come into play, and Ralf Schumacher believes that his manager Mark Webber should shut down any of these rumours and basically say, look, this is a fair environment. For Webber, it's a nightmare scenario, Ralf Schumacher says. He himself lost once in the title in 2010 against Vettel. For him, it's deja vu that he doesn't want, but it seems he doesn't have the necessary distance or maturity to recognise what he should be doing for his team and his driver. He also lacks the fairness towards Norris that is required. A manager needs to step up and say, listen everyone, the problem isn't the team, the car simply suits Lando better at the moment, Oscar needs a bit of time, both are being supported equally. Instead, Webber prefers to stay on the phone and wave it off. That is a shame. So again, Ralf Schumacher with an opinion. This, though, is what Mark Webber says, because Piastri, look, we saw those comments about the direction of the car after the races. I think especially after Mexico, his body language was pretty negative. And after the Brazil sprints, his body language was pretty negative. There were some positives to take from the race on Sunday. Still lost like 15 points, but there was glimpses of better pace in there for Oscar. So there is some at least optimism he can take. And I think it's now very clear to Oscar, he's no longer the favourite. He's far from the favourite. There is still some pressure on him not to like totally collapse. But in some regards, Lando's now the one with the pressure on, right? Lando's very much going into these final 3 rounds as like, well, he is the title favourite. If he loses, it would be considered a massive failure for Lando, right? To somehow lose it from the position that he's in and the progress that he's made. So in terms of, let's say, pressure, Piastri now has some of that, I think, taken off him to a degree. It's not been great, but, when you're behind in the championship, all of a sudden, no one expects him to win. So there's a little bit of change there. And Mark Webber says, look, we're going to get him turned around. I don't think he's low on motivation, let's put it that way. He goes on to talk about it's a tough run. This is about character, about those deep motivations you need at this point to come back. He's only in his 3rd year, bit of an arm around him, bit of encouragement here and there. When I was fighting for my championship, it was when I was really old at the end of my career. But Webber says, look, he is very motivated, definitely willing to give it a good go from now to the end of the season. It's not like Piastri is just going to phone it in and admit that, it's over, right? Like, I tried and then I bottled it or whatever. Maybe Piastri feels that way deep down, but as I say, I think the dynamics have changed slightly in the last few rounds. The problem for Piastri is that, first of all, he's got to score enough points to actually catch that gap up. And also, Lando does feel like he's turned a bit of a corner mentally, I think. Seeing some of Lando's reaction, I'm sure that he's feeling the pressure now a little bit more than he was, but it feels like he's coping with that better than he has before, taking things very much weekend by weekend. Lando even said after Brazil, he was like, look, I'm treating this season like I've got another 20 races to go. I'm not thinking about the run into the title. And if he can think like that, then I think it's almost impossible to see a way back for anybody else, because with the points looking like this, Max, it would really take something for Max to win it, but it would start in Vegas, right? And I think this Vegas Grand Prix is going to be critical because the McLarens haven't been that good there the last couple of years. So if they find themselves further down the order, if they find themselves in traffic, who knows what could happen at the start of a Grand Prix, right? Then all of a sudden things could be wide open yet again. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.